Hotline Miami is a fast-paced, ultra-violent, retro-style game that feels like it came straight out of the 80s. Arriving in a time when simple pixelated graphics in favor of raw gameplay began becoming popular once again, the game garnered rave reviews and is now considered something of a modern classic, and it's not difficult to see why. The game takes place in an alternate 80s timeline in which the Cold War exploded into full scale, which the Russians actually won. Not that this is even focused upon or even really told to us directly in the game. It's really more about a serial killer who takes on the Russian mob in Miami during the late 80s and a psychedelic trip as he blasts his way through their ranks. It's a very 80s noir-styled story, leaving only questions on the table and only very rarely offering up any answers, leaving it to the player to put the pieces together as they wish. It's also not a very consuming story, with cutscenes being fairly short and locations between levels being about as long as you're able to run to your car. Graphics may seem dated at a glance, but they fit extremely well here. Though pixelated, there's a lot of detail to be had in these pixels, and things run much more smoothly than period games it may be compared to. They may not be stunning to look at, but the graphics fit the colorful, psychedelic style the game has going perfectly, clashing wonderfully with the darker themes and ultraviolence, raising the question of what makes graphics good, how they're presented and executed, or their fidelity. I honestly couldn't imagine a developer trying to pull something like this off in an ultra-realistic style, and don't think I'd want to. This, combined with a brilliant upbeat synth soundtrack, gives the game an atmosphere which is very nearly perfect. If there were an issue, it'd be the repetition. See, most enemies look the same, dress the same, shave their heads the same, and a lot of levels, while designed very differently, don't actually look so, reusing assets left and right. Some of this is to fit into the overall theme of the game, sure, but it also would have been nice seeing a little bit more variety to match the awesome styling the game offers up. Then there's the gameplay. Hotline Miami is like an old school arcade game with checkpoints. What I mean by this is it is very fast. Most enemies are killed easily, but so are you. Any weapon is a one-hit kill on everything but certain rare encounters, and the same is true of you. Thus the game is built around blazing through a level, shooting guns, tossing knives, swinging everything including your fists, and dying very, very often, only to immediately begin again at the last checkpoint on the level or floor you last loaded onto. This isn't to say you cannot take a slower, methodical approach. Far from it, you are given a zoom button which allows you to see across most maps, as well as a lock-on button to target distant and/or moving enemies. But the game rewards point values to how you play levels, which go on to unlock new masks for your character, with bonuses to each, as well as new weapons the game will randomly scatter about levels. As well, there will be times you are forced into a fast-paced style of play, where you have to rely on twitch action or moving to the next level in a hurry, and if you happen to be playing the game slow, then these moments can easily catch a player unaware and cue in a lot of frustration. The AI is not the greatest thing in the world, though it doesn't particularly need to be. Hit detection can be a bit wonky, and enemies have a tendency to get stuck in strange patterns within the environment. The reactions are so different as to seem almost glitchy. Most will come running at the sight of you, allowing for easy abuse, though they also have a startling reaction time which can make straight-up gunfights and head-to-head melee fights, especially against multiple targets, an incredibly dangerous venture. Gunfire will usually send foes running for you, though often enemies will simply ignore it and continue on their merry pathing as if nothing has happened. It makes the game less predictable, if nothing else, though there is certainly a level of frustration to be had when they go a bit too far off the rails. This might be a greater complaint, but honestly enemies here don't tend to last long enough for it to be a major issue, with difficulty usually centered not on how to kill an opponent, but how you will kill them without their buddies killing you. That said, the design of the game is surprisingly well done. Developers wish to keep things simple, and in doing so they were wise enough to keep it short. There's enough new and strange encounters, as well as boss fights, to shake things up for the duration, not allowing the game to become very repetitive despite 99% of the enemies you'll be facing being the same reskinned mook over and again. The game also progresses very nicely, from a simple first chapter with few enemies which shows the basics, to progressing into increasingly more complex chapters, actively acclimating the player to the skill level it eventually requires. requires. And then, even when you think it's all over, there's a nice little bonus couple levels to see an alternate view of things in the background story I play, which shakes things up all over again. Overall, I consider Hotline Miami a fantastic title, but certainly not one for everybody. A lot of people are going to be frustrated with the difficulty, and especially some of the AI wonkiness and hit detection, though I'd rarely call the game straight up unfair. I could also see frustration if one were to play with a controller setup, as the aiming in Twitch play seems to heavily favor a mouse setup. That said, if you can stand some difficulty and a bit of mechanical frustration, don't require realistic graphics, enjoy fast-paced arcadey games, and happen to be a child of the 80s, then you're likely to find some love with this title.